So welcome to the capital of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I've never said that before in a show, but I just wanted to do it once. Where We Don't Have Time is absolutely delighted to again be a key media partner to London Climate Action Week. We would also like to give a big shout out to Sustainable Ventures. They're located here in County Hall next to the London Eye, and they have given us a studio and a home for the team for this week in London for London Climate Action Week. In this broadcast, we want to look at the role of nature in climate proofing a country, in this case, Britain. Climate proofing against climate change happening today, and perhaps more importantly, the almost certainly more extreme climate change impacts to come. The decision to focus one of our shows on this topic was inspired by the National Emergency Briefing on Climate and Nature that happened in London last November. And here UK scientists talked honestly and directly to UK politicians, asking them to take their climate-related political responsibilities more seriously. To inform today's show, let's see part of an interview I did with Paul Behrens. He's the Professor of Environmental Change at the Oxford University Martin School and also at Leiden University in the Netherlands. If we could just play that, please, right now. So another wonderful guest with us here. I can't say it because I can say on the streets of London, but anyway. Another wonderful guest here with us who has actually been presenting at the National Emergency Briefing on Climate Change and Nature. If you could say who you are and where you're from.
So I'm Paul Behrens. I'm from the University of Oxford and I work in food systems, climate change, nature recovery.
What some of the headlines were you trying to give to the politicians who were attending the event today?
Yeah, so really it was to let politicians know the depth of the problems that we're facing. So starting off talking about what are the serious issues that we are facing in terms of food security. So, for example, the chances of multi-breadbasket failure that go up as the world warms, the increases in the cost of living because food gets more and more expensive, the issues with civil unrest if food prices go too high. But then also to say, well, what can we actually do about this? Because, you know, clearly we're facing a scary future and we need to know what we're facing. So we need to own up to that and face up to that, but we also need to know what we need to do about it and then where the courage is going to come from to take that action. So in terms of what we can do about it, we need a great food transformation and we need 4 main pillars. So we need a change in diets, we need reductions in food waste, we need improvements in the production of food and making that as healthy as possible, and increasing food resilience. But when we look across all of that, plant-rich diets is the biggest opportunity that we have, especially in a high-income country like the UK, or for much of Europe, or for the US. Plant-rich diets would reduce agricultural emissions around 60%. In the UK, you'd save an area of land almost the size of Scotland. And we need it for the resilience in the future as well. So we need it in order to draw down carbon on the land and also roll with the punches of climate change. So, and I did also talk about why, yes, it's in our own best interest for the environment, but it's also in our best interest for health, because currently unhealthy diets is costing tens, if not hundreds of billions of pounds per year. And also in terms of the farmers, because farmers across the UK face a very, very difficult farming situation moving forwards when we look at the extreme weather events and being able to produce food on that land. But let's face it, it's never been a very good income for them either historically. And so if we're able to change the system so that farmers are paid for the nature and climate benefits that they deliver, and they can be true land managers and spark a rural renaissance, then we'd actually be able to address many of our different problems. And we find that incomes would actually go up, not down, for farmers across the country if we did it right.
So there are 2 big lobbies in the world. There's the fossil fuel industry, but I remember reading the Financial Times, was it 2 years ago, maybe 1 year ago, that the actual sort of agricultural lobby or the companies that fuel agriculture in a sense, in the way we have come to know it, intensive agriculture, that they spend even more than the fossil fuel companies, which was quite outrageous. There's a big fight going on over energy, and probably with agriculture there is a big fight going on too. And a lot of disinformation linked with that, of course. I mean, people have tried to change the agricultural systems in some of the Nordics. I think there was a big fight in the Netherlands a couple of years ago. So it's an interesting battle, because what you're unveiling or unveiled today was a vision of a very different farming system in the UK that would be good for climate action, but also good for health and incomes. But some people might not want that.
Yeah, so that's a huge issue. And so we see a lot of misinformation, as you say, in agriculture. So the agricultural lobby in the US is actually bigger than the defense industry's lobbying. So it's a massive, massive influence. And so, yeah, we have to really address this. Now, some countries are moving towards doing this. So the Danish have a Danish plant-based action plan, which aims to target all the way across the food supply chain and improve the production and the consumption of plants. Because actually what this is becoming is a national security issue. Having people struggling with their diet, having people not able to afford their food is clearly a national security issue. And so really we have to address a lot of that misinformation. Now, that misinformation is incredibly nuanced and clever. So what we see is that they are targeting specific groups in society on social media through influencers, and they're often targeting younger people. And the reason why they target younger people is that's when habits are formed in terms of your diet, and then it's harder to change in the future. So what they're doing is they're really sort of targeting men between 18 and 26. And so we really need a strong, forceful pushback against this. And that's one of the reasons why we had the National Emergency Briefing today, of course, is that the media isn't reflecting the scientific information, and it's not even reflecting what most people across many countries want in terms of a change in the action on climate change, on agriculture, on nature.
And you, in terms of meat, you weren't saying, oh, well, you're going to have to live all your life without meat. It was that you live your life with far less meat in your diet, correct? Yeah. But let me ask you one question. The cost of living crisis that we hear about now, is that going...
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry, yeah.
Okay, I would have taken, when you were waving, I would have dealt with that. Okay, now we've got a, yeah, okay. All right, sorry. The cost of living crisis, is that right now, is that in part fueled by climate change? Are we already seeing the footprint?
Yeah, so climate change is already partly driving the cost of living crisis. An estimated third of food price increases is down to climate change. That was in 2023, and that's only going to continue into the future. So the research shows that that's the case. Right. Yeah.
And just confirm, climate change has a footprint on that.
Yes, climate change impacts cost of living through food price increases and in disruptions to food supply.
Paul, that's lovely. Last one point, we've got a campaign called Make Science Great Again, which is aimed at some of the populist politicians in the world who would like to misuse climate science or play down climate science as being slightly irrelevant, even cancelling science culture. We need peer-reviewed science, I think, more than ever to be our North Stars. So we'd like to give you a cap, which is Make Science Great Again. It's deliberately provocative because it's red, but we don't believe that Donald Trump can own the color red. It's just a color, right?
Make red great again.
Yeah, make red great again. But thank you very much indeed for being with We Don't Have Time.
Thank you very much.
Chair of Natural England, the government body set up to protect England's nature and landscapes. He's a passionate ornithologist. Tony has been vice chair of Friends of the Earth International, a key figure on the Prince of Wales's International Sustainability Unit, and much, much more. Tony, come and join us on here on the sofa. Very nice to see you, Tony. Yep, lovely. Tony, for our viewers in over 150 countries, can you briefly tell us what is Natural England, or what does it do?
So I describe us as the British government's nature agency in England. We are a scientific body. We gather and manage evidence and data regarding the status of nature in England. And we are a regulator, so we identify where protected areas should be and play some role in the enforcement of those areas remaining in a good state for nature. We're an advisor, so government policies on planning, agriculture, transport, we have a role in advising government on how to make those things nature positive and compatible with wider environmental targets. And we are also a delivery body. So some of the schemes that government invents to advance the cause of the natural environment, for example, schemes to encourage farmers to do better through agriculture, we help to deliver those on the ground, working with people who farm the land. So it's quite a varied body of activities that we undertake, and we're a pretty substantial organisation. We have 2,500 staff, and we work right across the country. But we're right there on the ground and between that reality and what government does.
Do you have an enforcement role as well?
We do on sites of special scientific interest, for example. We try to avoid using that kind of power and to work with people in a positive way to enable them to do what they need to do, for example, in producing food, at the same time as retaining and improving the ecological quality. But we do have that regulatory backstop and also the powers to notify those places in the first place.
So we're calling this show climate proofing Britain.
Yes.
It could be climate proofing the world, because I think there's probably a lot of countries that share similar challenges, and we want to talk about nature's role. But I suppose Britain is a little bit special in one level, because we often hear it described as one of the most biologically impoverished countries, certainly in Europe, I think, and in respect to nature and biodiversity.
Yes.
So what are you doing at Natural England to try and change this reality? And perhaps in doing so, helping at least England, as part of the United Kingdom, to climate-proof itself?
So we recently adopted a new strategy, and we've called it Recovering Nature for Growth, Health and Security. And we've done that because what we need to do is to move the restoration of the natural world out of a silo, out of a niche, and to take it into the mainstream. And one of those areas is in relation to climate security. And of course, a lot has been said and written over the years about nature holding carbon in forests, in peatlands, in salt marshes, and so on. But an underappreciated dimension of nature is the ways in which it can help us to adapt and to be resilient in the face of now what's coming. And so in this country, there are 3 or 4 big headings that we face now in terms of climate challenge. One of them is heat. Very topical this week. We're going to see record-breaking temperatures once again. Another one is drought, and one more is flooding. And these 3 areas, alongside wildfires, which is linked to drought and high temperature, these things are set to get much worse. Now, if we improve the natural world, we can take the edge off of some of that. And actually, anybody in London today walking through an avenue of trees compared to walking along a street with no trees, you instantly appreciate the difference of what nature is doing to help reduce the effect of the urban heat island. And this is now problematic, not only because we lack the trees needed to keep the bird populations healthy in the city, we lack the trees now that we need to protect public health. This is a very serious set of challenges we're leaning into, but nature can help us to reduce flooding. It can help us to replenish aquifers and keep rivers flowing, and it can help to take the edge off of some of these heat events at the same time as being able to suppress fire risk, which is becoming a big problem. So for us, nature-based solutions to climate change are a huge opportunity, and we're trying to mainstream that now into all the work that we do, the evidence gathering we do, our advice to government, our delivery work on the ground, and indeed how we will notify and declare protected areas into the future, because this is now an additional layer compared to what we were doing 50 or 60 years ago, finding those places of most ecological significance. There's an opportunity now to be also looking at places where it would make sense to protect and restore nature, to bring these additional climate services alongside that.
And do you think you can defend the England that most people think of as being maybe wild or maybe indigenous? I mean, we could go back in time 2,000 years. It was a very different landscape, but the landscape of Jane Austen that most people are in love with. Can you do it, or do we have to accept a new reality of this country?
I think part of the motivation for what we've called conservation in Britain for many years, it has been quite nostalgic. It's been about looking back to a bygone age where there were birds and butterflies in the countryside, beautiful uncluttered landscapes, and of course those values remain essential and are one reason why people connect so strongly with nature. But I think the reality is that in looking forward, we probably should not be necessarily basing everything that we seek to achieve only on looking back, because where we're heading now with rapid global heating, never mind all the other pressures on the land that are here at the moment in terms of a changing energy system, questions linked with global food systems and how we're going to be able to maintain a strong supply of domestic food production, these things require us to take a different view of the future. There will be different species here in 20 to 100 years compared to what were here at the time of Jane Austen. And we need to be thinking through how we're going to accommodate that changing ecology alongside a changing climate whilst anticipating and protecting the needs of society.
Okay, Tony, that's great. Please stay with us. Next up is Hugh Bullock. He's a chartered surveyor by training, who in his long and distinguished career focused a great deal on regeneration projects in London, and especially the balance of social, economic and environmental objectives. Today, he's also realizing another passion, and that's for nature and restoration through the lens of the William Robinson Grave Tie charity in East Sussex. That's in southern England, if you're an international viewer, where Hugh is one of the trustees. Hugh, come and join us on this wonderful sofa, the right color anyway. Mine's more beige. So maybe, Hugh, touch on this issue of climate proofing this nature reserve. I know that you're working quite hard on this and looking at different ways going forward that this nature reserve can survive the future.
Well, particularly looking at various issues. I want to focus on trees at the moment. So in the context of trees, Britain came out of the Ice Age late. We're more vulnerable to stock than on continental Europe. So what we've done with fantastic support from the forest research scientists is set a site, which is one of 29 across Europe. What we're going to be doing is studying the different genetic lineages coming from 5 different species: maritime pine, Scots pine, wild cherry, sessile oak, and sweet chestnut, to try and look at which are the more resilient species for the long term, in what conditions, and as we develop them, how do they affect what's going on around them in terms of flora and fauna? It's not just about what survives, what goes on in the ground. We're looking at the soils and the carbon and other issues, but we also have an issue of pests and diseases traveling across Europe. That is also substantially driven by climate change. So I was trying to look at what is their resilience, what is their vulnerability, how do they affect the immediate environment around them? For example, I know the Woodland Trust have concerns about the speed of change of our natural landscape. And Tony mentioned earlier, the future will not look like the past. And how do we take people along that journey? How do we test what makes sense in the long term? It's a very complicated but important issue.
How do these trees, which may look like an English oak, but may come from another part of Europe with a slightly different genetic makeup and may flower at different times and blah, 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 how they interact then with the animals and the insects and all the others in this cascade of relationships?
Well, exactly, because it's no solution to find, let's say, for the sake of argument, and this is not a judgmental comment, but say some French oak that does incredibly well in Britain, but all the things that live off the British oak can't survive, and then you end up with your biodiversity is going in completely the wrong direction. So it's a very complex subject.
Yeah,
it is, and this is one of the things which I think has been underappreciated in the whole climatic discussion. Is this unraveling of connections that have been evolving over millennia? So some songbirds arriving now at a time when they would normally be feeding chicks, and caterpillar hatching synchronized with their egg hatching. Some of that stuff is now starting to fall out of kilter. I do wonder, though, whether at times we might underestimate the resilience that's in the system already. And I do remember a conversation with Charlie Burrell at the NEP Rewilding Project in Sussex. And Charlie was looking at the pollination of the oak trees in the landscape there. And they were picking up pollen grains that were landing on flowers of their oak trees in Sussex that originated in northern Italy. thereby carrying genetic material from the Mediterranean basin to be pollinating trees in England. And you wonder what might be the benefit of natural regeneration of acorns from those trees in being able to capture some of the resilience that's already been evolved in trees, which actually have got quite a long geographical range. So pretty much all the trees here, except for the dwarf birch, have got a pretty wide geographical envelope, with most of them occurring quite far south and east, and thereby being more used to drought and intense heat than some of our trees you might expect in this country to be used to. And be fascinated to find your research results, because that will be really interesting.
Maybe we can, yes, no, this is good stuff, guys. And I would hold just a thought there, Hugh, before responding to that more debate session, because we have another guest and we can't leave her standing in the corner over there. So I want to introduce Marion Boswell. She's a landscape architect. She's a horticulturalist and a sustainable gardening expert, but she's also a leading partner in the Chalk to Coast Kent Nature Recovery Project. So Hugh, I'd describe yours as medium-sized, small to medium-sized nature project. This is a huge, whopping big one, isn't it?
It's quite big. Thank you for having me, by the way.
Okay. Yes. And so tell us a little bit, Marion, what is the aim of this particular restoration, recovery, whatever project, and what are the aims and how is it going?
Well, thank you. So we were inspired by heatwaves, which you have just mentioned, and I was working with Guy Neville on his estate, and we always try to look over the fence and see what's happening, how we can connect to other estates. And what has come out of that is a 1,300 kilometre square nature recovery corridor, which goes all the way from the Kent Downs AONB, area of natural beauty, up through the Medway towns and all the way up to the Swale Estuary and the Hoo Peninsula. So it's quite ambitious. And how it's going, we already have 19 farmers who've pledged their land, 14,000 hectares. And we've been working with ABEC on visioning and understanding what's possible. And they have said that there's at least £300 million of natural capital which we could work with. If you only want to think about the numbers, obviously the numbers are important to persuade people to come on board, but actually the opportunity is much, much bigger and more exciting. And we've had huge support from Natural England.
So this is, yes, Natural England. So that's why you're here. And because they're the advisors to the government, now they're also the advisors to We Don't Have Time TV.
Yes.
But you're obviously going through rural areas, but you're also going through areas where there's, as you mentioned, the Medway towns.
Yes.
These are quite big urban conurbation
Huge,
areas.
some of the worst deprivation in the country. Yeah.
And some of the worst deprivation in the country as well. Yeah. So how do you deal with that? Because you're landowners, estate owners. Do you have to then also link with the towns themselves and the how does that work?
We've had, again, it's farmer-led, so I think we're unique. I'm the only non-farmer on the board. So there's 3 big farm clusters who came together. And really, because of that, we've got a massive backing from the landowners already. We also have the church commissioners on board in Rochester, and we've done a big workshop with a lot of the local government bodies and yes, just anybody who has a say and who can help, and particularly around water. So when you were talking about trees, for us, we have the Medway catchment area, we have the chalk aquifers, all of the North Kent Downs feed into the chalk, through the chalk aquifers and supply all the water to that area. And then, of course, we have the estuary and the coast. So we can help with flood prevention, we can help restore grazing marshes. So yes, it's very ambitious, but it's hugely exciting.
What, I mean, you're living and working in this region of southern England, southeast England, we should say. Are you seeing climatic impacts on the land, on agriculture, but also on the nature of this region?
Well, yes. I mean, we have big influxes. We had flooding. We had huge flooding. We had 30,000 people in Kent without water since January. And so I feel that because I turn on my tap and you don't always know that you're going to get water. And that's a really funny feeling. We're so used to completely relying on electricity and water and things like that. And to not know if the water is going to come out of the tap. That's a big, big change. So yes, We know that we're going to have a 319 megalitre deficit by 2025. Buell water produces 22 million litres a day. So that's a huge gap that we need to think about.
So how are you? So we talked about climate proofing, but
yes,
what are you doing then? I mean, it's just maybe one
yes
emblematic example
yes
of
absolutely
what you're doing to actually climate proof this quite large area of South
Yes. Okay. Well, if we just sort of go back to basics, what can we do? So the things that we can do, number one, soil. So how we farm, how we look after the whole huge biodiversity under the soil. That's massive. So if we can farm, keep the roots in the soil, if we can plant trees, if we can look after our floodplains, and if we can look after the wetlands, that's huge. That also locks up carbon. So soil is number one. Water, I would say, is number two, which I've touched on. So if we can re-wriggle our rivers, we can put our floodplains back, which we are doing. So I'm involved in a few projects where we're doing that. Some really simple things like putting scrapes on your farm. So you're catching the water and letting it filter down to the aquifer rather than zooming off to the sea as fast as possible, carrying nitrates. So how you farm, how you look after water, and then what you plant. So we're working with farmers to plant trees is an obvious one, but hedgerows are really important. Having margins is really important. And in gardens, I mean, we have huge amounts of beautiful gardens in Kent. There's a lot of work we can do there. Every single gardener has a massive part to play. So although we're quite built up in some areas, there's a lot that people can do there as well.
This theory, gardens, I mean a lot to the English, and they are, great reserves for all kinds of possibilities in terms of bird life and other things. And Kew, I know, I wrote an article for Forbes magazine about this new initiative that Kew are doing, Kew Gardens, to demonstrate how you can garden in a time of climate. The gardens have a role to play in climate proofing the country.
Very much so.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about the Wheel to Waves, I mean, we are, as an estate, involved in Wheel to Waves, but also, if you add all the gardens in the Wheel to Waves corridor, that is a far bigger area than Aston, Ashdown Forest, than Knepp. And in fact, if you look at the Wheel to Waves corridor, they're trying to get every gardener to sign up. And we've actually had an initiative at a very local level on exactly that issue.
Yeah. So one little calculation I did on the back of the envelope the other day was to arrive at the conclusion that the gardens in England are between them twice the area of all of the national nature reserves put together.
Good God.
And so if you imagine that we got our gardens into a good shape ecologically, no insecticides, no slug killers, put in some native shrubs, leave some areas to go wild, a pond, absolutely wonderful. And if you imagined a street with houses backing onto each other, and each of them put one or two native trees in, you'd finish up with a mixed woodland going between the houses. And if you did that, the dawn chorus would come back to city centres. We'd have the insect life that I used to know in suburban gardens as a kid restored. It's gone now. Rarely do we see butterflies, even in Cambridge, where the gardens are quite leafy and still quite green. But we've had a tendency over recent years, you go into the supermarket, brightly coloured bottles, kill this, kill that, and you go around and squirt with abandon. You're removing the food for the birds and the bats, as well as killing the insects. We've concreted, we've put paving down, which then causes water to leave the gardens more quickly, which causes the sewage works to overflow, which then causes the terrible sewage problem that is of such a source of concern for English people at the moment. So by doing better with our gardens, we can bring back the wildlife and, in a slightly roundabout way, even make a contribution to protecting our rivers.
But Tony, you knew all this when you were head of Friends of the Earth.
Yes, and I've been saying it for 40 years now, Nick, and I hope I don't have to say it for another 40, but I fear it might be a while.
Well, I fear that climate change is getting
and to be encouraging, if one puts what Tony's just described into practice, and I hope many of us have tried to, and others are doing, the speed of recovery actually is incredible. If you just will focus on it and think it through and get on with it, what comes back and the speed is very...
There's very simple things. I think one thing I would say is if we could do away with those awful close board fences and have hedges instead, that would be such a simple thing for everybody, because hedges hold water so well as creating an amazing wildlife habitat.
Can I just say I'm a bit nervous that everybody's agreeing here on everything, only because it probably all makes utter sense. But if you listen to what Beran said from Oxford, Martin, and you listen closely, and I talked to him off camera afterwards, he believes it's impossible to climate-proof the United Kingdom again, to absorb all the quantities of water that will come in huge, downpours, monsoon-like downpours, or the massive droughts that we're facing as well over the coming years, without really radical changes in the agricultural systems of the UK. To set aside, he mentioned a size of, say, Scotland that's left to deal with climate change. And in that argument he made, he suggested that large quantities of livestock production would have to go. Now, how do we know these arguments about livestock? They've been around for a long time. But are those arguments not getting more acute now than they were in the past?
There's a few things
Marian?
happening here.
Yeah,
One of them is infrastructure. We actually need a lot better water infrastructure. We can't rely on catching water in Buell water for Kent, for example. It's not big enough. So we actually have to invest. The government haven't invested in proper water infrastructure since the war. So that's number one, before we start saying what the farmers can do. On the farm, what I'm particularly interested in is what the farmers can do, because there's no point saying it's hopeless. We have to get rid of Scotland and we have to get rid of all the farmers. Actually, what can we positively do? And farmers can positively do a lot. Okay. As far as having livestock on the farm, actually, if you're looking from a soil and ecology point of view, some livestock is really important. Yeah. We don't want feedlots. Have you ever read the ultimate pigginess of pigs? We don't want the unkindness of raising animals in those brutal ways. But if we have some livestock on a farm in a really good regenerative system, then we've got a really good balance, and then we can have both.
Well, with the Ashdown Conservators, we provide the winter grazing for their Richard Galloway historic herd. So the reason we do that is not just because their traditional herds are part of the Ashdown forest management, and they need other land, but they also help us in a managed way in some fields, but not others, to drive the biodiversity opportunities.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of nuance in this discussion around livestock and meat. And actually, if you look at quite a lot of this country, quite a lot of it is quite rugged upland, where, grass grows quite well, but not much else. And in those landscapes, cattle in rough pasture with some old trees can be a cracking, fantastic habitat, which those animals help to maintain. And so moving to livestock production, which is more of that character, and moving away from some of this intensive farming that brings in vast quantities of feed from the other side of the world, that may be a better direction of travel than saying we should eliminate livestock from the landscape. And actually, there's a little phrase that always is in my mind when this subject comes up. It's not the cow, it's the how. Mm-hmm. And so an intensive livestock unit being fed soya beans from a deforested part of the Amazon is an utterly different proposition to some traditional breeds in the uplands of England, which are helping to maintain the habitat.
And if you look at how
cows.
If you look at how they trample the landscape, and if they're properly adaptively grazed, so if they're moved along and trample as they go, then you hold a lot of carbon in that soil. So actually, it's a really good climate mitigation tool as well.
Can I just say, with fairness, Paul Burns is not saying that you clear all livestock off the land in the UK.
But that is what some people would take from that comment.
And I think it's a really important point there, because I think Tony used a key word, which for me, I think has become almost unfashionable, and that's nuanced. These conversations.
Is that somewhere in France?
In other words,
on the border with Belgium.
How we communicate. Huge part of our point is messaging education. We have school children, we have volunteers every year, but having the conversations in the subtlety and not the soundbite, not there's simple this or simple that. And of course, people's patience for those conversations isn't perhaps always ideal, but it's so important, I think, that we have these conversations and the subtleties that we're all talking about are drawn out.
And based and informed by
good science. Exactly, evidence and science.
Another thing that we need to hold on to as well, because again, whatever we do has to be somehow embedded in this. And the decisions we make can sometimes be awkward, but they can also be liberating if we understand that the science is behind this.
Indeed, the science and the evidence applied to real world situations. And actually something Marian said, which is, quite a factor in the decline of biodiversity in much of lowland Britain, is the decline of mixed farms. And so we've kind of split the country in half. In the east, we've gone for arable. In the west, where it's a bit wetter, we've got more animals. Whereas 60, 70 years ago, the country used to be much more mixed up. And those farm animals that are kept on mixed enterprises, they help to contribute to soil fertility. They help to make the most of the resources available on the land. And also, in a world where the climate is changing and we've got these big issues now linked to emissions, they help to make us more resilient by having healthier soils that can hold more water. And also, actually, as we're speaking, fertilizer is now a major issue. If you can use animals as part of a rotation that helps to maintain soil fertility, we have to rely less than on fertilizer coming through the Straits of Hormuz. And so it's a multi-layered discussion, this one, and it needs to have all the elements in it to make sense of it. But as you were saying here, it's a conversation style these days, which tends not to have a lot of nuance, never mind multiple components in it.
Well, that's the challenge. And I want to pick up on your point
Last
earlier about
point here, Hugh.
last point.
Yeah.
Local genetic variability. One of the things we have elms that are resistant to Dutch elm disease.
Yeah.
So the idea that you can find the plant perhaps that can survive, you may not have to always go too far to find it.
And the butterflies that follow.
Exactly. There are some in Brighton, I saw them.
Right. I think we're going to have to pause that here. I'm going to have to say au revoir, goodbye to two of our guests. Thank you so much for being on We Don't Have Time. And you can now
Thank you very
escape.
much.
Thank you very
Thanks for
much.
having us.
Nice to see you both.
So I'm delighted to welcome two new guests to join here with Tony Juniper for the second half of our show. And they are Dr. Elizabeth Gray. She is the CEO of the National Audubon Society, which is headquartered in the United States of America, but does a lot more in other countries too. And Ross Lowry of the North Mayoral Strategic Authority in Northumberland, which for those watching from other parts of the world, that's way up on the northeast side of England. But Elizabeth, with your permission, what I'm going to ask first is, can we hear from Ross on the English side of things? And then we're going to come to the more international side in a few minutes. So Ross, tell us about the Northumberland Rivers projects. What are they doing in terms of responding to the challenge of climate change and climate proofing? And then we'll come to you, Elizabeth, on that. So Ross, over to you.
Thank you. It's worth saying a couple of words about the environment up in the northeast of England. A vast, largely rural landscape with farming, with uplands, working landscapes, and also impacts of climate change that we've already seen. So a couple of our really most beautiful catchments, and I would urge anyone to go and see them, are the Coquet and the Wansbeck in Northumberland, characterised by largely traditional farming, but also with climate impacts being felt now in terms of wildfires on moors, but also serious flooding. 2008, we had really terrible floods in Morpeth, flooded 1,000 properties, £40 million worth of damage in places that you wouldn't have expected to have seen it before. So the response to that has been, I guess, shock, impact, trauma, but also looking upstream and looking at the landscape and seeing how we can work together. And I think what's really interesting about it is bringing together a wide partnership. So yes, government agencies, Natural England working alongside the Environment Agency, but also local authorities, councils, excitingly, mayoral strategic authorities. So devolution happening in this country, giving new perspectives on this stuff. And critically, which I think you've touched on already, farmers, landowners, the people who actually need to make a living from the landscape. And I think what's happening is really exciting. It's data-led, it's evidence-led, it's working with the people on the ground, working across a large catchment on the Wansbeck, but not huge, internationally not a huge catchment, but very flashy, very fast-acting. So working across catchment scale. I think excitingly for me as a sort of a mayoral strategic authority is thinking about how do we use the market to do some of this stuff, and how do we use nature as an agent to protect our people downstream, and how do we do that in the context of a regional economy that we need to see growing. So this is as much for me is about regional economic growth. Weird, terms that you wouldn't use in this space, like inward investment. and job creation as much as it is about nature recovery.
Can you give us a specific, right? I mean, how do you take a river system like the Coquette or the Wansbeck, and how do you work with farmers and say, we need to do this together? And this will be good for your farming. It's also good for climate proofing this region, be less floods, blah, blah, blah. Is it quite simple measures that are blindingly obvious? Or are there more complicated things? Who finances it? And what about these markets that you were talking about? Because I think you're doing something with carbon markets.
Yeah, absolutely.
Carbon markets. So, sorry, that's like a marathon question, but just so that the viewers might get a sense of what do you do to achieve these ends.
Yeah, and I think the most important part of all of it, and I'll touch on a few of those, but I'll leave you with the most important point first, which is probably listen to the landowners who know how the land works, because you need to integrate their understanding of the land with latest environmental thinking and learning from across the world. Some of the measures look really low tech, low key kind of measures. So. But probably, best characterized by one of them is reconnecting the rivers with their floodplains. Most important. At the moment, they're not. And you see, to the untrained eye, I would say it's quite, to me, it's very special, but it's quite underwhelming when you look at it. You go, oh, what is that the extent of that? Does that what sort of regenerative farming really looks like? Is that what rewilding looks like, where you raise the river by a matter of centimeters, reconnect it with its floodplain, allow willow to grow, allow that willow to then accumulate gravels, allow the offline ponds to create, and to do that on a field by field, and then find you've done it landscape by landscape, suddenly you've cracked the problem without even really having done that much. But I think the real challenge for me, and the reason why it's quite exciting to have it, I guess, an economic person looking at a natural system, is how can we bring tools and approaches that we use on, so for example, I work on offshore wind as well. So, how can we use our approaches to large renewables, such as investing in infrastructure, investing in innovation, investing in supply chains, and creating the skilled roles needed to create an industry? How do we do that in nature recovery? Because that's what you need. And critically to the question, you need a market to work. And as I say, I see that as an inward investment opportunity. There's nothing more amazing to me than having money traveling from London and international investors into my region to recover nature in my region. That is a win-win-win for me.
And these investors, what do they get out of it if they invest in the carbon markets in your area?
What we're trying to do is to give options. And actually what I think we've discovered across the Wansbeck and Coca catchments, and probably across catchments across the country, is you do need to be able to stack those benefits. You need to be able to go, look, if you want to invest in carbon, great, we've got a plan for you here. If you want to invest in biodiversity through Biodiversity Net Gain, which is a really quickly growing marketplace, great, we've got a product for you here. But also, I would say that there are an awful lot of investors who want to invest without buying a credit. They want to invest for other reasons, for sort of environmental, social reasons. And we need to be able to, I think the most important thing we've learned through creating a market, and we created a marketplace, a regional marketplace. We think it might be the world's first carbon and nature marketplace based in a place. But if it's not, it's definitely the world's best one. But the idea being that you actually respond to the customer in this way, rather than telling them this is how you buy carbon and this is where you buy carbon, saying, where is it important to you and how would you like to do that? Would you like to support peat restoration, which is incredibly important? Or is it woodlands? Or is it actually insulating people's homes? And being able to put a package together to respond to what the market requires is what we're trying to do.
Okay. Interesting. Stay with us. Let me turn now properly to Dr. Elizabeth Gray. And Elizabeth, firstly, viewers in Britain we know one that's heard of the Audubon Society for sure, because he's a massive ornithologist. But for those in Britain that haven't heard of your organization, tell us briefly what it is.
So National Audubon Society is a conservation organization that is powered by birds. And so we have been in existence for over 120 years. And I think there's several reasons why we've been able to exist for that long. The first is that we're science-based. So we use science to guide all the decisions that we make. We're also nonpartisan, and this is especially important in the increasingly divisive world, not just only in the US, but I think increasingly across the globe. And so we've worked across 22 different presidential administrations, kind of half Republican, half Democrat. So both science and being nonpartisan have enabled us to do that. So we're guided by a strategy that we call Flight Plan, and we have an ambitious vision, which is to halt and ultimately reverse the decline of birds across the Americas. This is really important because in my lifetime alone, in North America, we've lost 3 billion birds. And so that's 1 out of every 3 birds no longer in existence in North America. So a lot of people say, what does it mean to do conservation powered by birds? We see birds as the symbols and the sentinels of the planet's well-being. We see them as indicators of environmental health, and we basically treat them that way. And so birds are very, very important. So in terms of what we're actually working to accomplish across the hemisphere, we are building a 300 million acre habitat corridor where it's a network of lands and waters across the Americas that's climate resilient. We're working to, you were talking about offshore wind, we're working to accelerate 100 gigawatts of renewable energy across the landscape. That's enough to power 75 million homes, solar, wind, and other things. And then we're also looking to sequester and store 30 billion tons of carbon in natural systems. And we've been talking about that on the first panel. And so we're working both to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through renewable energy and natural nature-based solutions, as well as build climate resilience for people and for birds.
This is fascinating. So are you doing this because you bring the public on board if you provide them with something like renewable energy, and at the same time you're dealing with climate change that threatens birds? Is this? I'm trying to work out the flight path mentally here. You mentioned flight paths, right? How do we weave this together? As because I mean it's wonderful what you're saying, and it's absolutely fantastic. But I can understand the climate proofing but is there a strategy which is actually bringing society along with you, if I can put it that way?
Yes, it's a great question. So one of the things we say all the time is if you do what's beneficial for birds, you do what's beneficial for people. So when birds thrive, people thrive. So one of the things we see in the natural world is when bird populations decline, it's one of the first signs that natural systems are declining. Birds will often be one of the first groups of species that are going to leave an area when an area is being degraded. When you restore, you talked a little bit about restoration in the first panel. When you restore an area, birds are often the first to come back to an area as it's healing. And so you can really use birds as indicators of not just what birds need, but what people need, what local communities need. And we absolutely are working to use birds as our guide, as the science to guide where we work, where we can have the greatest impact for a healthier planet, for everything that lives on this planet.
Let me just ask one last question, because I mean, we have heard a lot about the cuts in the United States in terms of budgets for climate action within universities, but among NGOs. I have friends, obviously with Earth Day, and they tell me what's going on. And, so we hear a lot of things. Is it more important than ever that NGOs like you stand up for these issues, like restoration of landscapes, climate proofing landscapes, and so on? And you may not even use the word climate proofing, I imagine, because it might be healing or something like, because I know a lot of groups in America using different language, right? But it's the same thing. Is it important that you stand up for this?
Absolutely. So I'll answer this a couple different ways. The first is meaningful climate action it just can't exist without multiple sources of funding. That's the first thing. So what we've seen over time is, Audubon has been funded by governments, local, regional, federal, and even increasingly global sources of money, but also private philanthropists, foundations, corporations, and businesses. So in my opinion, if you're really trying to build durable climate action and durable climate results, you have to have diverse partnerships and you have to have diverse sources of money. So that's the first thing. So you really need to try to do that, I think, to create more durable solutions. That being said, I would say that nonprofits like Audubon, I think, play a very special role. In one way, that's for continuity. So that is one thing that Audubon brings, being in existence over a century. So the first things, we have continuity of data. We have a project called the Christmas bird count. This is a community science project. This is a project where people, everyday people, you do not have to be a scientist, you do not have to be a trained ornithologist. People go out at the end of the calendar year around Christmas time, and they basically go to specific spots and they count birds and they document that. We've been doing this for over a century. The really amazing thing about having long-running data and science like this is we can use those data to produce reports. And so, for example, a few years ago, we did a study looking at over a century of data to show that the climate impacts of winter breeding distributions in eastern United States on birds. So how climate is impacting birds. So you don't have a lot of those long-running studies where you've collected data for a century. That's somewhat unusual. So the continuity of the science is huge. We also have continuity of partnership. So we have a project we call Conserva Aves. This is a project in Latin America. It's actually across the whole hemisphere, where we're looking to put in over 100 new protected areas, subnational protected areas in Latin America. So we're working with indigenous groups, we're working with local communities, we're working with scientists and government officials. But these types of partnerships take years to build and they take years to maintain. So I think increasingly, as different sources of funding might come and go or become more scarce or more abundant, having that diversity and having that continuity are really, really important.
So we've been talking here about restoration. We've been talking about climate proofing nations. We've been talking about nature's role in this. And I mean, there's been a lot of positivity in the room on what can be done. But I mean, I think we all know, I certainly know from my career, and you know from your career, I'm sure we all know, is that science comes forward. It tells you, as this national emergency briefing that they did in London last year by scientists to politicians, this is a reality. You need to do this. And then politicians often go away and sort of massage the reality a little bit, because it's a bit difficult for this constituency here to accept it, or this group. So we, you know, same with fisheries. There were always estimates about how many fish you can take out of the North Sea by the scientists. And then governments go, yeah, but let's give the fishermen a few more, which ended up with a complete stalemate, or worse, that the fish just kept going down and down and down. Do you think that you're being listened to by those who can make these choices? You're advising the UK government. Do they really understand what this country's facing in terms of climate change? And in on a regional level, what do people get it? Maybe Ross first. Maybe Ross first. I'll come to you.
Yeah, I'll give the regional level and you know, possibly a quick plug for devolution here, because the local nature recovery strategy, which is the approach in England of having strategies for parts of the country, the whole country covered, they're led by, you know, the nature recovery strategy is led by the mayoral strategic authority. It works really closely with Natural England, with the Environment Agency, with landowners, etc. But actually, what you're doing is getting below the sort of the. I always say we need to have a bit more light and a bit less heat in this debate. And actually, if you get into a regional debate, some of that polarized politics is lost in places. Yeah. And actually, you start being evidence-led, but you're also learning, I think, so from, you know, you mentioned sort of the international perspective and indigenous populations of people, but there's a huge body of knowledge in the farming community. There's really great practice in the Northeast in farming, pushing the boundaries, doing it because they need to, not because they've been told to. There's also some terrible farming practice, and we need to see a lot more of the good stuff, and we need to be able to pull that out. But I think it's about bringing, you know, really great new innovative ideas in, but also applying that in a local landscape where folk understand how things work. You know, and to give an example of that, I was in a local village hall on a Friday night a couple of weeks ago, because I really like to get into this stuff around sort of local people making decisions for themselves. There was almost a bit like this couch at times. You know, there's almost furious agreement about what we need to do. And guess what? Yeah. It was nuanced, and it wasn't black and white. It wasn't cows or no cows, and it wasn't sheep or no sheep. It was, how do we work in this landscape?
Yeah.
And what's worked and where did we mess?
Yeah, how do we make stuff work? This does seem to be where quite a lot of people are at. And actually, Nick, in answer to your question, which is a really good one, I think sometimes the highly polarized national discussion you see in this country, it does draw attention away from what's actually going on. And so you've got quite a lot being said in the media here and big political speeches, all the nature's getting in the way of the economic growth and therefore we should get rid of the environmental rules. And you've got another group saying drill, baby, drill, get rid of the climate change targets. And behind both of those big polarized national discussions, if you go to ground level and see what's going on, it is much more positive than what you might take from that. And, you know, the British government has got some really very good laws and very good policies. We have an environmental improvement plan. We've got the work going on to get to zero carbon electricity by 2030. And it is motoring on and it's making progress. And if you go out into landscapes and speak to people, you can see what's going on. And we just have to maintain that. And I think it's about supporting the initiatives that have got that multi-sector, multi-partner capability and actually focusing on places. And one thing I say to my colleagues at Natural England a lot is if we don't do nature recovery in places, we don't do nature recovery because it all happens somewhere. Mm-hmm. And whether it's a river catchment or a farm or a group of farms, we have to work with people who've got the reality on the ground understood in terms of how the land works, how it's managed. And the more we can build those partnerships and coalitions in river catchments and in landscapes and the idea of farmer clusters we heard about from Marion earlier, these are the things that are actually working and are delivering change on the ground. And, you know, if you want optimism, go to ground level and talk to people who are doing stuff. If you want to be thoroughly depressed, listen to the news.
We've got to get better at telling local stories, though.
Well, I'm going to just give Elizabeth just a quick comment there. I mean, you work in the US, obviously, but you also work in Latin America and the Caribbean. Just very briefly, do you see action happening in all these places that you are, touching, as it were, with your society? Well, climate action.
Yes, we do. Absolutely. And one of the things we've touched on kind of indirectly, but I'll state a little more directly, is a lot of these climate projects also provide economic benefits to local communities, farmers, ranchers, indigenous communities. And so one of the reasons I think you have local communities embracing these things, even though the news may make it sound otherwise, is because oftentimes when they are climate proofing their livelihoods, they are actually increasing their economic sustainability and well-being. And so that's a really important dimension of this conversation that I think enough people don't talk about. We see that whether we're working up in Canada, whether we're working in the United States, down in Latin America, there are ways to do nature-based solutions. There are ways to incorporate kind of a just transition into renewables from a more fossil-based fuel industry where you can actually help increase people's, not only their health, but their well-being and also their economic sustainability and livelihood.
Good. Well, as you say, this has been irrepressibly positive in both parts of this conversation. Obviously, the world is facing huge challenges. I mean, we can't deny that. But I suppose we can do our best and put our best foot forward to actually ensure that we minimize the damage and maximize the opportunities to sustainably handle the shocks that are underway and also coming. And so thank you very much for being with us and have a super day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.